Hello everyone, here we are for a new video about ListOf. I thought I would record one to explain how to install the application on a local environment. So let's get started. First thing would be to clone the ListOf repository. So you can do that by going to github.com/alexisroland/listof, and then you have the HTTPS URL you can use to clone. On my side, I'm using Visual Studio with a PowerShell terminal available here. So I'm in a GitHub repository. As you can see, I'm just going to do git clone the URL, which I'm pasting here, and it's going to create a ListOf folder with all the files to run the application. Okay. Next, if you scroll down to the end of the README file, you should have a link getting started in which I put together the steps to install the application. So I will just go through those, starting with the requirements. So ListOf has been fully containerized. Each of the components of the architecture is running in a dedicated Docker container, which is great for portability. But it means the first requirement would be to have Docker installed on your machine. So you can do that in different ways, whether you are on Linux or Windows. On my side, I'm currently using a Windows machine, and on Windows it can be done in two different ways as well, depending on whether you are on a Pro version or a Home edition. Right now I'm using a Windows Home. So I already installed that application called Docker Toolbox for Windows. I'm cheating a little bit, but the download and installation takes time, so I've done that already to shorten the video. Once you've installed Docker, if you're using the Docker Toolbox for Windows, you should have an application called Docker Quick Start Terminal. If you run on Windows Pro, you should have a Docker Desktop for Windows. You can test it quickly from your PowerShell terminal by doing docker ps, which should list the containers which are currently running. In our case, obviously, there is no container running yet. Okay, Docker is installed. Next step would be to actually set up your instance of ListOf, starting by creating a configuration file called .env, like environment. So I'm just going to copy the content of the file here and create it at the root of my repository in the ListOf folder. Let me save this here, .env, and let's go through that file together. It contains a couple of environment variables used by Docker to initialize the different containers. So you have the name of the PostgreSQL database. You should not change it. You have the PostgreSQL user used to initialize the database and its corresponding password, which you should change if you're running a production instance in particular. Then we have the environment variable used for the GraphQL API, including the URL used to connect to the database. It contains the user and the password mentioned above, and a secret key, which you should change as well, which is used to encrypt the token used for the authentication of the API. Okay, that's pretty much it for the configuration file. Next step will be to create an SSL certificate and its private key. So the web application of ListOf is running over HTTPS, and in a local environment the easiest way to do that is to create a self-signed certificate. I've provided a small repository here to do that using Docker as well, so that you don't need to install OpenSSL. So you can just clone that repository. I'm going to do that now. And then you can change a directory into that Docker OpenSSL folder, and we're going to build the Docker image used to generate the certificate. I'm copying this, cd docker OpenSSL, and docker build my image. It's a lot faster on my side. On your side, it should probably take some time to download the different dependencies. I've run it before, so the image was actually in my cache, which explains why it's so fast here. But don't be surprised if it takes some time to download on your end. Okay, so next step will be to connect, to run that Docker image in a container in interactive mode, so that we can generate the certificate. You can do that in two different ways, whether you're on Linux, on Windows Pro, or on Windows Home. I'm personally on Windows Home, so I'll run a command similar to this, which I have to update to change the your path variable here. So I've done that here in a text file. You can see docker run itrmv. So this is actually the path where I want to generate the certificate. So it's the full path from my C drive to user, Alexis, document, etc. down to my ListOf project repository, the nginx folder and the config folder, which correspond to what you see on the left here, nginx config. So I'm gonna copy this and run it. Alright, so I'm now connected to my Docker container with the OpenSSL prompt. I have only one last command to run to generate the keys, which is this one here. It's asking me a couple of questions. Country name, China. I'm in Shanghai. Locality is Shanghai as well. Organization, I'll just say ListOf. Unit name, we don't care. Common name, this is localhost. Email address, I don't care because I'm just in a local dev environment here. And this is done, so you noticed there was two files that have been created under that folder, cert.pm and its corresponding private key, key.pm. Now I can just quit the container by pressing Ctrl D and we can move to the next step, which is to create a Docker network. So the Docker network is used to connect the different components and which are running into separate containers. Basically, they're going to run into a private network, which is more secure. So Docker network create ListOf network. This is it. Next step will be to create a Docker volume. So the Docker volume on the other side is used to persist the data from the ListOf database, which means you can shut down your container and rerun it, and you will still have the data you created. So I'm running volume create ListOf db volume. And final step for the setup is to build the Docker images. So I've done that before because again that takes a bit of time. I'm just going to rerun the command to show you without the no cache flag, so that it can reuse the previous cache that I used. Docker compose build. So before that I need to go to my project repository, ListOf. And so the docker compose command is gonna browse the docker compose file that you have here to build the corresponding images. Okay, images have been built, and so now you can run your instance with docker compose up. You have the -d argument if you want to run it in the background as a daemon. On my side, I'm just going to run it on the front of the foreground, so that you can see the logs and what it is doing. So it's starting each container. It's going to set up the database, running a couple of SQL commands to create table, triggers, functions, etc. Then it's running the GraphQL container, and finally the application container. Okay, the application is running. You can access it from your browser. So if you're running on Linux or Windows Pro, you can access it from HTTPS localhost. If you're running on Windows Home, Docker is actually running on a dedicated IP, which you can find if you open the Docker Quick Start terminal. In my case, it should be 192.168.99.100. So I'm just going to copy this, navigate to HTTPS. Alright. Google Chrome is triggering an alert because I'm using a self-signed certificate which hasn't been registered publicly, so this is normal, but I believe acceptable if you are running something in local dev environment. You can just proceed to the address, and then you have your application up and running. So it's completely empty right now. You can log in with the admin user and the admin password. You can create your first list. My first list, description. I will add one quick attribute. My attribute, mandatory text. Okay, and I will just add one value as an example. Hello world. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video and that it's useful to help you set up the application. If you have any question, don't hesitate to reach me on GitHub. Thank you for watching.